Oh, okay. Ethan Persinger says that they've been cosplaying for a few years and recently found themselves dragging their feet on starting their next sewing project because they have yet to find a way to integrate the current workspace and the style of that project. Do I have any advice for finding ways to improve one's workspace to better accommodate a particular style of making? I thought about this for a while because I really don't have any specific advice. Your question is too abstract to answer in a concrete way, but I definitely have thoughts about rejiggering a space. I grew up with an interesting example that my parents had bought this house in Tarrytown, New York, with a whole bunch of rooms in it, 15-room, 3-story house with a full basement. And my parents moved their master bedroom 3 times over my childhood. And in my adulthood, my wife and I moved our master bedroom in our house about 6-7 years ago. And it was great. It was like got a whole new house. So I like approaching spaces and thinking about ways to improve them. And I think of a house not as a static thing, workspaces not as static things, but as progress. They're projects in progress. So the 2 things I have as advice for you about thinking about improving your space to accommodate different projects. One of the difficulties people have in thinking about how to change stuff is they see what is, and what is an anchor for what can be. And by that I mean, there's so much that's already there, you can't quite conceive of how to grid on some change. And so my advice is always to think about emptying out that room completely and putting it all the way back together. I do a lot of projects like that. And when you open your mind to think through that, even just like work through the mental exercise, how many people would it take? If you had 5 people, could you do it in a day? Could you empty the whole space out in a day and then put it all back in a slightly different way? But the other frame, and it's very similar and close to this, is I love this question. I came up with it somewhere along about 10 or 15 years ago, and it's just this phrase: if I could wave a magic wand. And if I could wave a magic wand, it's like a magical incantation with which to open your mind to what your real desire here is. It's funny, I started the live stream off talking about how to know the priorities of a build and how when you have the build in your body, it's much easier to understand all those priorities. This is the same exact thing. If I could wave a magic wand, and then first thought, best thought, what do you want to see? And pay attention to that. You might not be able to get anywhere close to it, but it gives you a guiding light. It gives you a compass heading. That's what it does. It frequently gives me a compass heading. And I love stepping into a situation where someone's like, I can't figure this out. And I say, well, if you could wave a magic wand, and they'd be like, oh, in that case, I'd blah, blah, blah. And again, that just knowing that is like this spectacular way to go from the current reality to what can we do to get closer to there than we are now. We don't have to get all the way there, but knowing that as the North Star, knowing the if I could wave a magic wand result gives you a compass heading to start traveling in. Oh, yes, this is great. Shaggy Justin. Shaggy Justin. Is that because of November? Are you Movember? Are you shaggy because of Movember? Shaggy Justin says, I know you enjoy cooking at home and Mrs. Don't Try This, but do you have any other non-maker hobbies that maybe aren't as well known, like collecting old Sears catalogs? I don't know anyone that does that, just a random example. I'd love to see your collection of old Sears catalogs. Bird watching. Yeah. Like a lot of people our age, it seems, we have gotten really into birds in the past decade. Even so much that in 2019, we went to Spain and to Italy for a long trip. Most of the time was spent in Spain. We spent a few days in Barcelona, one of the most beautiful cities in the world. We went down to Granada and saw the Alhambra, which is amazing. And then we drove from Granada to Seville, to Sevilla. And when we spent as much time in Sevilla as we had in Barcelona, but we also spent a whole day in Sevilla driving out to the coast to do bird watching on a protected wildlife sanctuary out there. And it was off season, and it was still spectacular. We've driven all over COVID. We drove up and down the Bay Area, down to Monterey, up to the Sacramento Delta. There's some amazing heron rookeries to visit in the Bay Area, and some wonderful bird watching that you can do. We're in a fantastic location for bird watching. And I mean, I have two stories, and they both involve owls. One is it's middle of high COVID. So it's like, you know, late summer of 2020. And every weekend we take Maggie to an empty Golden Gate Park to go to Speedway Meadow and walk her. And at one point we're walking and Julia hears a screech owl. And she's like, I think it's this way. And so we just start plowing into the woods, and we found it. She found it. She was like, there it is. And screech owls, man, even when you know where one is, they are incredibly camouflaged. But we saw it just like sitting right there. This big Charles Durning from the first Dune movie eyebrows. Just amazing. So thrilling to hear something, to know what it is, and to go find it. We're slowly trying to make friends with the ravens on our back deck here in the Mission. But if you're at all interested in bird watching, you want to get the Merlin Bird app, which is really, really fun. So the Merlin Bird app is an app that has a microphone, and you can ask it to listen to the birds chirping around you and tell you what those birds are. And it has some false positives at times, but in general, it's a spectacular way to get to know the birds in your area. It's really, really neat. I can't recommend it enough. And in the past year and a half, the Merlin Bird app has occasionally told both my wife and I that it hears a barn owl. And when you look up barn owls, San Francisco is not a regular barn owl habitat. Like, they're rare here. And so for the longest time, I was really pretty sure that it was like a false positive, that it was mistaking something else. But it kept showing up on both her app and my app. And then, about 6 or 8 months ago, I'm sitting on the deck, and on my deck, looking up this way, there's a big palm tree, and looking over this way, there's another kind of tree. And we've got this sort of open space in the middle, and I'm sitting on the deck, it's nighttime, and I can see above the palm tree heading towards me is a big shape. And because we spend a lot of time on our deck looking at birds, I know that it's not a crow, I know it's not a pigeon, I know it's not a seagull, I know it's not a falcon. It's bigger than any of those things. And as it's getting closer, and it ends up flying only 8-10 feet over the deck, I can tell that it's completely silent. And I don't know if you've gone into any of the YouTube rabbit holes about owls and their feathering and how they fly almost silently compared to raptors, which don't have to be silent. But there's some amazing science and physics around how quiet owls are. And at this point, I had been inculcated enough by my research into birds to know that the silence of this large shape heading towards me was unique. And I just did this, and my wife's eyes followed, and she saw it too. And we watched it fly over us, oh man, and go off in the distance. And we both knew that it was not a screech owl. We could tell that from what we could see of the head shape, but we didn't see that classic half-apple shape of the barn owl. Barn owl's face looks like a Granny Smith apple cut in half, because it's nighttime. But I really think it might have been a barn owl. And then, like a week ago, I'm on the deck, and it's early evening. It's like 8 p.m. It's dark, but it's 8 p.m. And I hear this, and I hear it again. This very specific barn owl screech. And I turn on my Merlin Bird app, hit record, and bang, we hear one more screech, and it says barn owl. So I really think we've got a barn owl somewhere here in the mission that's feeding, which is really, really cool. I have talked about the way in which the penny drop experiment on Mythbusters was a real sea change for me in understanding both what my job was as a television host and science communicator, but also in positing a theory of how to show a penny's terminal velocity oscillating between two different speeds, coming up with a hypothesis of how to execute that, building that thing and having it match my hypothesis exactly was an endorphin rush of preparation and analysis and execution that I had never experienced before. And I think of that as one of my origin moments as a scientist. Because when you gather enough information, when you know enough of the inventory about something, to recognize it under difficult conditions, so it's a long way of saying that, like, bird watching is its own science. It's its own discipline. And I've done it enough to be rewarded for the knowledge that I have gained in situ. Seeing that owl fly over, and it might have been a different kind of owl than a barn or a screech, I get that. But like just knowing that I was witnessing an owl because I knew enough to know it was quiet, that feels really, really great. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I wanted to briefly mention that you could become a tested member. I know everybody is competing for you to become a member of their thing. What I want to express to you is that the tested membership has become such an important part of the tested family. We get tremendous feedback from the tested members, and they expand the stories that we can tell and the things that we have access to. And you can become a part of it right now by clicking on the link below. See you in the chat.